The night was dark and cold, with a biting wind blowing through the deserted streets of the city's outskirts. The lights in the houses were off, and the only thing breaking the silence was the distant sound of barking dogs and the murmur of the wind. In a dead-end street, hidden between broken walls and tall weeds, there was an abandoned lot, left to decay for years. The lot, with its loose stones and dry trees, seemed like a refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. It was there, by an ironic twist of fate, that a baby would be left behind. The sound of crying was muffled, almost inaudible among the trees, but it still pierced the night with its desperate purity. It was a weak cry, a melody of pain and loneliness. The baby's mother, a young woman with a tired appearance and eyes full of fear, looked around as if trying to find some other solution, some other way out. But there was no more time. Despair had completely taken over her, and the only thing she could do now was run. She was alone. In the silence of that night, she felt the weight of the choice she had just made. The baby, only a few days old, was in her arms, fragile, defenseless, unaware of what was happening. His small eyes still couldn't comprehend the world around him, but the mother knew. He was innocent. He didn't deserve abandonment, but the cruel life she was living forced her to make this decision. She had no resources, no support, and with each passing day, she felt herself sinking deeper into a bottomless abyss. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she held the baby against her chest, hearing his crying grow louder, as if he could feel the fear in her voice. The cold wind cut into her skin, but it wasn't the temperature that made her shiver. It was the weight of the decision. She looked at him one last time, tears streaming down her face, before gently placing him on the ground, among the dry grass, in a dark corner of the abandoned lot. For a moment, she stood there, looking at the small being she had just left behind. The pain tightened her chest like a knife, but there was nothing more she could do. The words she wanted to scream were stuck in her throat. The young mother quickly turned away and began walking back, not looking back. The sound of the baby's cry echoed in her ears, but she knew she couldn't go back. However, contrary to what the mother had imagined, destiny had chosen a different path. The baby, so small and defenseless, still had a chance. While the mother disappeared into the darkness of the night, the silence of the abandoned lot was broken once again, not by the baby's crying, but by a distant and comforting sound, the sound of footsteps. The baby was still there, alone, but hope, though fragile, was beginning to flicker. The early hours of the morning advanced, and the cold wind showed no mercy. The abandoned lot, once deserted, now seemed emptier than ever. The baby's crying, once constant, had faded. The small body, weakened by exhaustion and cold, was still wrapped in its dirty clothes dampened by dew. The darkness seemed to swallow everything, but there was something, an invisible presence, hovering in the air as if fate was about to write a new chapter in this story. On the nearby street, a man walked slowly, his shoulders hunched, pushing a shopping cart filled with glass bottles and pieces of cardboard. It was João, a homeless man known to everyone in the neighborhood. He had no home, but his calloused hands and serene gaze showed that he had found something valuable in the simplicity of his life. Although many looked at him with disdain, he had a huge heart and a rare empathy. His name had become almost a legend in the more remote parts of the city. João, the good one. He didn't have much, but he always gave what he could to those in need, whether it was food, a kind word, or makeshift shelter. That night, however, something felt different. The wind cut through his skin, and he felt a chill, as if something were calling him. As he passed by the abandoned lot, the sound of weak crying reached his ears. It was a melody of pain, something he could never ignore. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, suddenly shone with an alertness he couldn't control. He stopped immediately and looked around. "Who's there?" he said in a low voice, more to himself than anyone else. The crying grew louder, clearer now, and João, without hesitation, moved closer. The fear he usually felt when walking the streets at night seemed to dissipate in that instant, replaced by a sense of urgency. He knew that whatever was needed, he would do it. As he reached the center of the lot, Where the weeds became thicker, he saw the baby. The tiny being, eyes closed and skin pale, looked so fragile that João could hardly believe what he was seeing. The baby was wrapped in a piece of cloth, its tiny fingers trembling, and its breath was weak, as if it were on the verge of giving up. "My God, you're alive," João murmured, feeling a lump in his throat. He immediately crouched down, gently picking up the baby in his arms, as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. The baby's body was cold, and João realized that it was in a state of extreme dehydration and exhaustion. He didn't know where the baby had come from, but he had no doubt that it needed help. With the baby in his arms, João returned to his makeshift shelter, a small space under a bridge where he usually spent his nights. The shelter was simple, just a few blankets and some trash bags used to protect himself from the wind, but in that moment, it was the only refuge he could offer the tiny being. He didn't know what to do, but he felt an instant connection with the child. As if, somewhere deep inside, he knew that his life was about to change forever. João found a little water in a bottle he had in his cart, and, carefully, moistened the baby's lips, hoping the little one was strong enough to survive. "You'll be all right, little one. I'll take care of you," he said, trying to convey a reassurance he didn't feel. The hours passed slowly. João stayed there, watching over the baby, not knowing what he would do the next day, but determined not to leave the little one alone. He felt helpless in the face of so much suffering, but at the same time, something in his chest warmed, as if he were fulfilling a mission he couldn't explain. The baby, tired and weak, slowly drifted to sleep in João's arms, feeling human warmth for the first time in its short life. The silence of that early morning, once so frightening, now seemed more comforting. João knew he needed help. The situation was beyond what he could handle on his own, but something told him that, no matter how cruel fate had been to the child, he could not let it fall back into the same darkness as before. There, with the softness of a solitary star, a spark of hope began to glow, and he was determined to nurture that spark until it became a fire of possibilities for the little being now in his care. The sun had not yet appeared when João woke up, but the cold of the night was already giving way to the soft morning breeze. He hadn't been able to sleep well. The baby, now still on the makeshift blankets, seemed calmer, though still very fragile. The little one was breathing heavily, and João's eyes were heavy with fatigue, but his mind wouldn't stop asking, "What am I going to do now?" He knew he couldn't care for the baby alone. He had no means, no support from anyone, and, most importantly, he lacked the medical knowledge the child likely needed. João wasn't a man of many words, but in that moment, he wished more than anything that he had someone to share the responsibility weighing on his shoulders. That weekend, as usual, the square where he spent his afternoons was busy. Residents gathered to chat, children played, and fruit stalls offered vibrant colors. But today, something seemed out of place. He approached the newsstand and, while buying a coffee, the headline of the local newspaper caught his attention: "Disappearance of young mother and baby. Investigation continues." A sharp pain tightened João's chest. He didn't know why, but the story of the baby seemed even more heartbreaking than he had imagined. The mother, the young woman who had likely abandoned the child, had mysteriously disappeared, and the case was being investigated by the authorities. The word disappearance echoed in João's thoughts, and he felt the weight of knowing that if the baby's mother truly was gone, the child would be placed in some shelter or orphanage, where it would be without the protection he wanted to give. What to do? If he called the police, the baby would be taken from him and sent to a system João knew to be cruel and impersonal. But at the same time, he didn't have the resources to care for a child. João didn't know if his decision was the right one, but what he felt in his heart was something he could not ignore. The baby needed a chance, and he, João, might be the only person at that moment who could offer that chance. As he pondered his options, the story of the baby began to circulate throughout the neighborhood, and soon, many eyes were turned toward that tiny being. It was then, after a few days, that the story reached a woman named Helena. Helena had lost her only child years ago in a tragic accident. She had never fully recovered from the pain and loss. The emotional scar was deep, and despite her attempts to move on, she always felt a vast emptiness in her chest. Helena had become involved in social causes and volunteer work, but nothing seemed to fill the void left by her child's death. Until one day, as she passed by one of the community organizations where she worked, she heard the story of the abandoned baby. "It's impossible not to be moved, isn't it?" said the woman beside her, reading the news. "This baby is in critical condition. It seems no one has come looking for him. Abandoned in a vacant lot." The story is heartbreaking. Helena looked at the baby's photo, and something deep and inexplicable stirred within her. She stared into the child's eyes in the photo, and a wave of emotions flooded over her. It was as if, somehow, she knew that this baby wasn't just another victim of life, but someone who needed a home, a love that she could offer. "I have to help. I need to do something," she said to herself. Helena contacted the organization handling the baby's case. When she arrived, she learned that the baby was being cared for by a homeless man, João, who had found him in the vacant lot. João's account moved her deeply, and Helena didn't hesitate for a second. She knew her life was about to take an unexpected turn, but above all, she felt that, in this moment, fate was offering her a chance to start over. "I want to adopt him," Helena said, her eyes already welling with tears. "I can offer him a home. I need him as much as he needs me." The social worker looked at her with a surprised expression, but also with compassion. "Helena, we know your history and what you've been through, and this is a very important decision. We'll need some time for the legal proceedings, but if you're sure you want this baby, we'll help you." Helena didn't hesitate. Her heart had already made the decision, and as complicated as the process would be, she was determined. Soon, she got in touch with João and found him at his small makeshift shelter, holding the baby in his arms, his face tired, but with an expression that spoke louder than words ever could. I want to take care of him," Helena said, her voice trembling. "I want to give him a home. He deserves to live a better life than he was left behind in." João looked at the woman, and for a moment, they exchanged a look of understanding. He knew that, though he didn't fully understand why, she was here to fulfill the same purpose as he, to give the baby a chance. He couldn't offer him more than what he had already done, but he knew that Helena could. "I feel that too," João said with a soft smile. "I felt that he needed someone like you." And so, in that moment, Gabriel's life, the name Helena decided to give the baby, was about to change forever. No longer an abandoned child in a vacant lot, but a small being who would now have the chance to grow up in a home full of love. The miracle of fate, so quiet and immeasurable, was unfolding before them. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and orange hues. The city, with its familiar sounds and rhythms, seemed oblivious to the transformation happening in Helena's small house. She watched, with a smile of pure happiness, as the baby rested in her arms. Gabriel, her Gabriel, the journey that had started on a night of despair and abandonment, in a vacant lot where a small body had been left to die, now seemed distant and unrecognizable. The baby, once weak and vulnerable, now appeared strong. His eyes, though still curious and wary, shone with a light that only love could ignite. Helena sat on the sofa, with Gabriel nestled in her lap, gently rocking him. Every movement felt like a slow dance of tenderness, as if she were filled with a peace she had finally found, years after the pain of her loss. There was no longer any emptiness in her heart. Gabriel now filled that space, not as a replacement, but as a new opportunity. She felt like a mother for the first time, a mother who had so much love to give, so much care to offer. The change in Gabriel was noticeable. He was calmer, healthier. The expression on his face, once filled with sadness and fear, was now one of curiosity, like any child discovering the world around them. Helena knew he still carried the marks of his past, but she believed, with all her heart, that her love would be the key to his healing. João visited Helena whenever he could. With every visit, she noticed how involved he was with that little being. He was no longer the solitary man living in the shadows of the city. He now had a bond with that baby, an invisible and deep connection that he himself barely understood, but that was undeniable. They talked about what had happened and what the future held, and Helena always expressed her gratitude for his help, for being the first person to see the baby when no one else did. "He reminds me of something I lost," João said once, watching Gabriel as he played with his new toys. "But he also reminds me of what's possible when someone believes in another person, when someone gives a chance." Helena didn't have enough words to express how she felt, but she knew João was right. There, in her home, with Gabriel in her arms, she was creating something new, something that hadn't existed before, a family. The adoption process for Gabriel was still underway, and the legal system was a difficult maze to navigate. But Helena didn't mind the bureaucracy. To her, Gabriel was already her son. She called him my boy, and in some way, he seemed to know that he was loved. Each smile, each laugh was a victory. And with each day, she felt more connected to him, more aware of her role as a mother. On a rainy afternoon, Helena's phone rang. She answered quickly, recognizing the voice of the social worker. "Helena, I have good news. The adoption process has been approved. Gabriel is officially your son." What had started as immense pain, an irreplaceable loss, had now transformed into a love stronger than anything she had ever experienced. Gabriel was the reason she got up every day, the reason she smiled at the end of each day's journey. Life, which once seemed like a series of tragedies, now felt more colorful, more full of possibilities. That day, Helena did something simple, but to her, it meant the world. She placed Gabriel in his little chair and went out into the backyard. She held him in her arms and, looking at the sky, said, her voice choked with emotion, "I promise you, my son, that I will give you everything I have. I will give you all my love, all my protection. You are no longer alone. I will be here forever." Gabriel, with his big, curious eyes, looked at her and smiled. Helena couldn't see it, but she knew that in that smile was the confirmation of what she felt, the beginning of a new life for both of them. Gabriel's life, once marked by abandonment, was now being written with love, hope, and a second chance. The fate that had been cruel was now offering them the greatest miracle of all, the miracle of redemption, of family, of unconditional love. And in that moment, Helena knew that the pain and loss had only been the starting point for something much greater. There, under the gentle rain, she looked at Gabriel with a smile of pure gratitude and said, "Welcome to your new life, my love. I love you more than anything." And so, Gabriel's story, the baby abandoned in the vacant lot, became a story of hope, recovery, and above all, love. The miracle of fate was not just in the fact that he had survived that dark night, but in the fact that he had found a home full of love, warmth, and finally peace. And this, without a doubt, was the greatest of victories.